morning. I like it. Good morning. Welcome to the start of Holy Week. Today is Palm Sunday, so you get to wave your palm branches today. And we know that Palm Sunday started Holy Week with a parade. Jesus came in, everyone thought he was going to be the king. They waved the palm branches of victory, put their cloaks down so it was a big parade as he came into Jerusalem. So the only song that I could think of that kind of fits a parade is I Am Walking with the King on the King's Highway. So as the King's coming in his highway. So it goes like this. I am walking with the King on the King's Highway. I am walking with the King on the King's Highway. I am walking with the King on the King's Highway. Singing Alleluia, Alleluia. When things are sad, he's there for you. When things are bad, he'll see you through. There isn't anything that Jesus cannot do, 'cause Jesus is the King of the world. He walks with you. Do, do, dee, do. I am up, walking with the King on the King's Highway. I am walking with the King on the King's Highway. I am walking with the King on the King's Highway. Singing Alle, Alle, Alleluia. Singing Alle, Alle, Alleluia. Dear God, this is a special week. We see your Son coming in as the King, but not as the King that the people thought he would be, but our true King, who would defeat our true enemies of sin, death, and the devil this week through his crucifixion, his death, and his resurrection. Help us to truly walk with the King always on his highway that leads to heaven. Amen. Have a great morning. We'll see you in a bit. We're going to walk with the King on the King's Highway to looking at the screen, but we better set it up with the actual Bible passage. So if you get the Bible in front of you, since the verses aren't printed in the service for today, we're going to go to Luke chapter 19, beginning at verse 28, which is Luke's account of Palm Sunday and the parade, the entourage that came into Jerusalem that Sunday. Once again, Luke chapter 19, beginning at verse 28. And when someone finds it, shout out the page number.
1117.
Okay. 1117. Once again, Luke 19, we pick it up in verse 28. Someone just start going and I'll stop us along the way.
And when he had said these things, he went on ahead, going up to Jerusalem. When he drew near to Bethphage and Bethany at the mount that is called Olivet, he sent two of his disciples, saying, Go into the village in front of you, where on entering you will find a colt tied, on which no one has ever yet sat. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, Why are you untying it? You shall say this, The Lord has need of it.
Okay. So if you take a look at the map, you can kind of see everything is compact. That's one of the things when I went to the Holy Land. Sunday school, my mind was big, vast distances. This is not big, vast distances. You see Bethany in the lower corner and Bethphage. Olivet is just another word for the Mount of Olives, and the Temple Mount, where the old city of Jerusalem is. So if we go from Bethany to the Temple Mount, is probably 4 miles. It's not that long. And so we see Jesus coming to Olivet. Bethany and Bethphage are right there. Bethany, we know of something happened at Bethany on the way to Jerusalem. Remember, he's coming from Galilee, and now he's coming, and he hits Bethany first. What miracle did he do at Bethany? The raising of Lazarus. And that was probably the beginning of the most intensive, I won't say search, but intensive program put on by the Pharisees to do Jesus in. Because if he can raise Lazarus from the dead, then the people he's got that kind of power, the people are just going to flock to this guy. And we're going to lose our position. So that's where the intense scrutiny begins in Jesus leading into Jerusalem and why they wanted him dead. And the Bible even mentions about them wanting him dead because of what he did for Lazarus. So he's supposed to go, the disciples go, they're supposed to get a colt. Why a colt? Why not a big white steed or a big war horse that the Romans had? Why a colt? The foal of a donkey. Not even a horse, a donkey. A lowly animal, the symbol of humility and poverty, and another P word. What's our church? Peace.
The colt is a symbol of peace.
Yeah, a burden, humility, and peace. Because when you come out with a donkey, you're not going out for war. You're coming out in humility, like truce. Like I'm humbling myself before you. I'm showing I want peace. And so he comes, and that's what he's going to do. He's going to humble himself to his Father's plan of salvation, and he's going to bring about the peace through the forgiveness of our sins, the true peace that we need. Yes, he's going to battle, but not the way they think. He's not going in there to get rid of the hated Romans who have been oppressing them for years and years and years and years. No, he's going to do the true battle. So, tells them to go find the colt, and let's pick it up after that, after the Lord has needed it.
35.
32.
So those who were sent went away and found it just as he had told them. And as they were untying the colt, its owner said to them, "Why are you untying the colt?" And they said, "The Lord has need of it." And they brought it to Jesus, and throwing their coats on the colt, they set Jesus on it. And as he rode along, they spread their coats on the road. As he was drawing near, already on the way down the Mount of Olives, the whole multitude of his disciples began to rejoice and praise God with a loud voice for all the mighty works that they had seen, saying, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest."
Okay. You'll notice some kind of directions, not necessarily north, east, southwest, but up and down. Right at the very start in verse 28, we went on ahead going up to Jerusalem, and he's coming down on Olivet, because the Mount of Olives is like a little mound or a hill in between Bethany and Jerusalem. So you start in Bethany, Bethphage, you go up Mount of Olives, and you come down the other side into the Kidron Valley, and then you come up again, because the Temple Mount, or the city of Jerusalem, was also built on a hill. So that's where you see going up to Jerusalem, down the hill. It's very, we wouldn't say mountainous, but it's a very hilly country at that stage. And what are the people shouting?
Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord.
Okay, that is a very important phrase, because that was talked about as a prophecy in the Old Testament, that God's righteous one, his Messiah, his anointed one, would be the one who comes in the name of the Lord, the one who stands for the Lord. And so, by saying that, rightly so, they're acknowledging him to be the king, David's ancestor, the one that the throne was promised to. But once again, they're only looking at it from an earthly standpoint. They're thinking the throne of King David in Jerusalem, Romans gone, we set up shop once again, and we're number one in the world. We become the world's force once again. Blessed is the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven, glory in the highest because of this great thing. And it is great. They just don't get it, unfortunately. And because these things don't happen in a spiritual vacuum, then also we get the old stick in the muds. There they are once again, the Pharisees. And we finish off with what the Pharisees said.
And some of the Pharisees and the crowd said to him, Teacher, rebuke your disciples. He answered, I tell you, if these were silent, the very stone would cry out.
Okay. See, the Pharisees got it. Rebuke your disciples for using that phrase. He is not the Son of God. He's not the Messiah. Rebuke your disciples for using that title. That's what they're getting at. Because they don't believe in Jesus as the Son of God, the Messiah. They're saying, if you use that title with him, you're just as bad as him. Rebuke your disciples because you're all blasphemers. You're all claiming something that isn't true. That's why the Pharisees are so upset. Which then leads them to, on Good Friday, 5 days later, stir up the crowds to yell, crucify him. But they're already, like I said, after Lazarus has been raised from the tomb, they're already very, very uptight. And they're really going after Jesus in a very direct, very personal way. And so, teacher, rebuke. Teacher, these are your students, these are your disciples, your followers. Tell them to stop that, because that's not in keeping with who the Messiah is. So obviously they don't get it. But what does Jesus counter with? Even if I would do what you say, what would happen? The very stones would cry out, because the true king is coming to his place. His throne, which is made of wood, just not something to sit on. His throne would become the cross, on which he would be glorified as the King of Kings. But the whole procession, coming in on a donkey's colt, showing humility. I will be humble, as Paul would say in Philippians, humble to the point of death, even death on the cross. So the cross becomes his throne on which he is glorified and his power is made known. And then in the empty tomb proves it 3 days later. So I thought this morning, since we've taken a look at that, we're going to go on the parade route. So if you can still hear me, which I think you should be able to, we're going to go from Bethany all the way to the Temple Mount. I gave a little handout, and I'll do a very brief summary of that in the sermon for today. But it's just kind of a visual clue of what's going on here. Now, if technology works properly, we will continue. Okay. When you get to Bethany, there's a ton of churches. Let me see if I can, I don't know. It makes it a little bit better. But there are a lot of churches because it's one of the, because Lazarus and the raising of Lazarus from the tomb, a lot of these sites had churches built on them during the Byzantine Empire, which is around the year 400, give or take. Because that's when Constantine became the emperor of the Byzantine Empire and made Christianity the state religion. But it was really his mother who started the process of sending soldiers, armed men, to go to the Holy Land to protect the holy sites. So that's why there's still a lot of these churches in these different sites that we go to, because they wanted to be protected by, I'm trying to think of her name, Helena, the mother of Constantine. And so as you're going, Bethany, there's the entrance supposedly to Lazarus' tomb. So when you go down these rickety steps, you can see not a lot of movement. You can't do two people at once going down. And supposedly there's the site right at the very bottom, kind of lower right, where supposedly Lazarus lay in the tomb. And so when Jesus says, even these stones will cry out, that whole area is rocky. It's stones, and obviously nature itself will claim him as the king. There's one of the churches. On the left is Mary, the middle is Lazarus, to the right is Martha. One of the many churches in Bethany. Okay, modern day Bethany is behind that wall. That is basically the ring around Jerusalem in the Israeli-held territory to keep the Palestinians out and the Israelis protected. That thing is about 30 feet high, and you'll see a guard tower. There's a guard tower every couple of kilometers, and that goes through the whole West Bank and on the western side by the Mediterranean, down by the Gaza Strip, where you hear all the fighting and stuff going on today. It's separated so that if you want to go to certain sites, you have to pass through these checkpoints because only Jews can go to certain places. Okay, why is this not moving forward? There we go. This is from the top of the Mount of Olivet. You can see there's a road going down. That would have been the road that Jesus took, the King's Highway that we've just been singing about and walking about. To the left, you'll see the big expanse of, those are tombs. On this side, on the Mount of Olivet, on the top, are the tombs of the Jewish people. In the valley below, which you can somewhat kind of see over here, those are the Muslim tombs. And the Christian tombs are kind of on the other side here. And the Dome of the Rock, you can kind of barely see it here, over here. The famous territory right there on the left-hand side. The Muslims believe that on Judgment Day, when Allah brings everybody before him, there will be a thread. The thread will go from the top of the Mount of Olives over this valley of graves to the top of the Dome of the Rock. Everyone will be forced to walk along that thread. And as you can tell, only the faithful will be able to walk that thread without falling off. So any Christians or non-Muslim, like if you're a non-Muslim, you're not going to make it, in which case that's why you're going to fall into the valley of death, where all these graves are. I'm not making this stuff up. This is what they believe. So we were on the top of the Mount of Olives. Yeah, I just had to take that to prove I was there.
You were there.
I was there. Yeah, exactly.
So are we looking in the far, is that Jerusalem in the far distance, or is this all?
Yeah, Jerusalem over here. See, there's the Dome of the Rock. See, there's the wall of the city of Jerusalem. So if you look at your insert page, we're coming in from the east. So flip it to the page that has the three pictures of Gethsemane, not the map one, the opposite side. Because Gethsemane is just a little bit to the right as we're going down this hill. And so you're facing Jerusalem coming down the Mount of Olives. So this road here that we're walking on is what's called the King's Highway. This would have been the parade route for Palm Sunday. The point is, Jesus could see Jerusalem in front of him through the whole way in. He knew what he was going toward. I'll explain more about that in the sermon for today. So we go down, and the streets are very narrow. So even though there's lots of crowds, and they say, oh, we put palm branches and whatever, we're not talking the Highway 401 coming into Toronto, which is 16 lanes of thing. It's very narrow, so palm branches and cloaks would have covered the road very easily. So we're still coming down the hill of Mount of Olivet. We're still coming down the hill of Mount of Olives. We're still coming down the hill of the Mount of Olives. Now, here's where the break happens. If you turn to the left, that's the Garden of Gethsemane. If you continue on the King's Valley Trail, that's the King's Highway or the parade route. Jesus would have gone past Gethsemane on the way into Jerusalem on Holy Week. And we all know what Gethsemane meant for him. And so we come down the route. There's a little entry to the left. That's where we're going to go first, because there is the gate to Gethsemane. And you go in this side over here. And this is the Garden of Gethsemane.
Those are olive trees, right?
Those are olive trees. And sycamores and bushes, but mostly olive trees. But you can see, when we think of a garden, we think of vegetables and stuff like that. A garden to them is more a park. So this would be the park of Gethsemane to us. And there's one particular tree there that's 2,000 years old. So this tree would have been around during Jesus' time. Because what happens with an olive tree is when it dies, it continues, but another shoot comes out of the middle, and it just keeps expanding and expanding and expanding. So if you would cut that in half and cut the reins, you would get 2,000, you would get it back to the time of Jesus. But you can see the new growth and some of the new growth on the side here. It just keeps growing and growing and growing.
Lord only knows, over the years, the wars going on, they could have shot down.
Well, yeah, one of the things you have to take with a big grain of salt in the Holy Land is this really the spot? Because they're hawking all their wares over there. Here's some wood from the tree of the cross. Well, if you have all the wood from the tree of the cross that's sold, Jesus would have had to carry a tree that's about 100 tons in weight because of the size it would have been. So like I said, it's all conjecture. It didn't change my faith whether it was or not. It's just there. So looking from Gethsemane, this is one of the pictures I got in the half-page insert. Jesus would have come down the hill, and this is what's called the Golden Gate. This is the gate he probably would have entered in on the eastern side of the city of Jerusalem. So once again, we're almost going in a straight line from Bethany, Bethphage, Mount of Olives, Gethsemane, down the valley, up the other side, and up to Jerusalem. He would have entered through the Golden Gates.
So are they still open, or are
No, this is the opposite side. They're all
they concrete and shut?
right, because now we're on the Temple Mount. And I'll explain something in a minute. So he would have come through the Golden Gate, up these steps over on the lower left-hand side over here by the tree, up to this pad, which is called the Temple Mount. So he would come up the steps. Obviously, this Muslim place would not have been there. It would have been the temple, where the Holy of Holies and everything would have been. So he would have come up the steps, and here's kind of the Temple Mount. I tried to take a panoramic shot just to kind of get, there's still some walls that would have been there in Jesus' time, but would have started over there, continue, we'll back up here. Would have continued and that is not a mosque. I thought it was a mosque. It's not. It's just kind of like a visitor center. This is the place why it's called the Dome of the Rock, and it's sacred to the Muslims, is because this supposedly is the spot where Muhammad was sucked up to his paradise with all his virgins. So that's why this piece of territory is so important to the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims all at the same time, because we all believe something happened with our religion in that spot. here you can see this is the Western Wall, we call it the Wailing Wall, Jews don't like that. But this is the Temple Mount, so you can see it's about 5 stories high. And this rickety bridge on the lower right-hand corner that's what we were able to go through. At the base of that is almost like airport security. They've got things, detectors that you have to walk through. You have to produce your passport, because only the Jews can stay at the bottom, and only the Muslims can go to the top. We Christians can go to both sides, up and down. Because if the Jews would get to the top and claim this back for themselves, the Muslims would have a conniption and there would be World War III. So to keep the uneasy peace there, only the Muslims can stay up here, only the Jews stay down here, and because this is the only part of the temple area that Jews can still get to today, that's why they call it the Weeping or the Wailing Wall, because it's the only part they can get. They're looking forward for the Muslims to get out of there so they can rebuild the temple and reestablish worship with God once again. That's the Jews' goal. Which is why there's always fighting over this piece of territory all the time. But you will see down at the bottom the different, and only the men, Jewish men can go here, the women can't. So only the Jewish men, they kind of do their bowing. If you think of that, this might be crass to say, but there was that little kind of bird, cupid bird for drinks that would bob its head all the time. Well, that's what they're doing with the wall. They're praying against the wall, and they're just going back and forth. And they'll take little snippets of paper with Bible verses on it, probably saying, "Hosanna, come and save us," and they stick it in the wall. And then the wall, where the little chinks in the wall, will have all sorts of paper of scripture. So,
Are other women allowed there?
the women are allowed as far as down here. But they cannot go over here. In fact, you'll see some chairs. There are some rabbis teaching students. There's another spot for a rabbi to teach. But the women cannot go into that area. They're over here on the left. You can't quite see it. But there is a fence here. So this whole lower area is just for Jewish men. So now we go up to the Temple Mount in the one corner. This is, if you take a look at your half-page insert, now you flip over to the map part. And go to the colored part to the right. And this is the Antonia Fortress. You'll see the Antonia Fortress on the northern or the upper part of the old city of Jerusalem. This is where Pilate and all of his soldiers would have been in this area. This street here is called the Via Dolorosa, the Way of Sorrows. This is the way Jesus would have been tried by Pilate. There's an arch called the Ecce Homo, in Latin, here's the man, where Pilate tries to get rid of Barabbas and set Jesus free. But the crowds on the street said, "Crucify him," so Jesus would have come down this Via Dolorosa as part of his way on Holy Week. There's just a little bit more blurb about the Antonia Fortress. It was built by Herod the Great as a tribute to Mark Antony. So that's why it's the Antonia Fortress. And Jesus would have been tried here. That's one of the places that scholars say. This is a little bit of a modern update of the soldiers' fort, just to kind of give you an idea a little bit of what it might have looked like when in its heyday, its days of glory. This is what's called that Ecce Homo arch. Here's the man. You will notice too. Get your souvenirs. Like I said, everything over there, there's souvenirs, everything is hot. So you can see the beginning of the arch at the top. And there's the little window from whom Pilate would have spoken through. You will notice the street is very narrow, so once again, we kind of have it in our minds that when Pilate had the crowds, there were like thousands in this big square. No, they were just in this road. And Jesus, once again, part of the Via Dolorosa, the Way of Sorrows, would have walked through this street on his way to Golgotha, the place of the skull, where he would be nailed to the cross. This is just part of the archaeological digs of the Antonia fortress at the base. So this is where Pilate and his soldiers would have been stationed on the north part of things. So you can see it's a pretty expansive, pretty big place. So now this little map of going through the Via Dolorosa all the way to Golgotha. The place where all of this happens is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. We'll get to that in a moment. The one I'm just going to do briefly is this yellow one up here, because there is a Lutheran church there, the Church of the Redeemer. It's the home to the Synod of the Holy Land in Jordan. We would say it's more affiliated with the other synod rather than ours. But we did have a tour of it, and we had a little bit of nibbles there. It's a pretty nice church.
When you went with the synod, no?
What's that?
When you went in conjunction with the other.
Yeah, I went with Canadian Lutheran World Relief, which is made up of our synod and the other Canadian synod. So it's an amalgamation, which is why they ate this stuff up, because that's their side of things over here. So there's just a spire, the steeple of this big, huge Lutheran church on the way to Golgotha. So once again, we get to the end of our journey in the Via Dolorosa, the Way of Sorrows, and you go through this little archway to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Sepulchre meaning tomb where Jesus would have rested. You might recognize some people here. That's Ted Geese's wife over here, and this is Corey, Pastor Corey from Alberta, and I can't remember, Saskatchewan now. So you go through the arch, and here is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, right in the middle. And at the base of it, you will see an opening. That's the only way in and out of this facility. Big, huge wooden doors. They got metal things so that the doors can slide. And every morning it is unlocked, and every evening it is locked by a family of Muslims. Because inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, almost every single corner, nook and cranny is claimed by this denomination, that denomination. So there's Roman Catholics, there's Orthodox, there's all sorts of things going on in there. And so rather than who's going to get to open the door or not, they chose, I think wisely, believe it or not, someone that's not Christian. So a Muslim family is charged, and it's been going on for centuries, is charged, given the keys to open and shut that door each day. So you come through the doorway, and immediately you get this cement pad. Well, it's not cement, it's stone. Traditionally, once again, this is where Jesus' body was laid after it was taken off the cross. And of course, you're going to have all sorts of fun stuff up here. Everything has got so much stuff there, it's like, you're at least for me anyway, your mind's in two places. This is holy stuff, And yet you got all this gaudy stuff here. And it kind of makes a mockery of it. But I know why. It's because these are Orthodox Roman Catholic things. They're getting brownie points with God by going here. The worst part of it was when I went with Pastor Geese and his wife and Pastor Corey. We went about 6:30 on a Sunday morning just to get to the place where supposedly Jesus was buried. And you have to get in the line. I'll show it to you in a moment. When I got in here, there was an old lady with, she was wearing black. She brought out of her little laundry bag or her little clutch bag about, 50 little crosses. She set them all over the stone, the slab here, prayed over all of them, put them back in her thing, and she would go and hawk them, say, this was blessed on the whatever. And that's how she would make her money. So like I said, it's a tourist trap, unfortunately, for a lot of people. So there's a beautiful painting. So there's the slab that Jesus was laid. There's Golgotha, where Jesus was nailed to the cross. And there's where Jesus was laid in the tomb. And you think, wow, that's really close together. Well, guess what? All of this inside is close together too. So the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is over top of all of these three sites, where Jesus was crucified, nailed to the cross, where his body was taken down, and where he was put in the grave. Once again, very compact. So if immediately you go to the right of where the stone is, there's the entrance to Golgotha. And because it's the hill of the skull, you gotta go up the steps. So you up the steps you go. And once again, look at all the business in here. Man, you can't go around without shaking a stick at something that would venerate some saint or whatever. But there, supposedly at the end, is the site where Jesus supposedly was crucified. And just inlaid in all sorts of finery there. And there's even the rock from that time period. Supposedly the hill of the skull. So you come up here, you do your candle lighting, you go to the altar, you say your prayers, there's the Virgin Mary who's going to help you, all that stuff. And there's the rock, which supposedly is Golgotha. After you go past the altar area, you go down the steps on the other side, down the other side of the hill. There's the bottom stones underneath, so once again, just underneath what we were just by the altar to show that it is a hill. It's not just one or two rocks, it's a story and a half or about 2 stories high. And then you walk through the back way, once again, there's a stone walkway or a tunnel that goes away from there. And you end up here. That's the end of your journey. This is the shrine in the middle over the spot where Jesus supposedly was laid in the tomb. And so this is all built up around here. You'll see in the lower right-hand corner, you got to get in line and you go around this thing in order to get inside of it, to get your look at the spot where Jesus supposedly laid. So, I mean, very ornate architecture. And it's neat that they have a dome to let the light down, shining on that spot. I think for obvious reasons. So, once again, you start in line, you start walking, you get in line here, you start walking around the thing to the right, the shrine. You keep walking. As you're walking, there's different, like I said, every nook and cranny. So I think this was the Greek Orthodox site over here. But they even have church services going on all the time. And they'll have little snippets of people around the site, around this outside of this. You keep going around the corner, there's a Roman Catholic priest lighting all of those incense and candles. And you finally make it. And there's the entrance. You can't quite see it, but there's a gentleman, you can see his feet, you can see his cane in the shadow. shadows of going inside. You cannot take cameras in there, you cannot take pictures. You go inside there, and then you have to literally bend in half and go down about, I think it's half a dozen steps. And then there's, in the bottom of this, there's a spot that can hold maybe 6 people. And you're all bent over because it's only about 4.5 feet high. And in the middle, there's a star in metal with a hole in the star. Then you can stick your hand in and supposedly touch. That's the spot. Needless to say, there's a bunch of shrine stuff on the inside of that, too. You can't get away from that stuff. Because it's all brownie points with God, depending on what religion you're going in with. I just went in because it was a neat thing to do.
So did you get down in there?
I did. And I literally had to go on my hands and knees to stick my hand in the hole.
Less than your day.
So, and like I said, it's a very small neck of the woods there. Whoops. Yes, Ed.
To be more cartoons like that around in that general area, right? Because Joseph of Arimathea, he had to be the only one that had to.
No, but if that's what Helena said in 400 was the place, they put a church over top to protect it. So it possibly could be, but it doesn't. In fact, where we were staying in outside of the old city of Jerusalem, there's a spot over there that said, no, this is the tomb, because there's a garden over there, like a park, and and this is where Jesus, when you could go inside and look at the tomb there too. So, I mean, who knows? Once again, it's not going to change my faith. And hopefully it wouldn't change people's faith. So what I tried to do here is to take the original picture, starting in Bethany, Bethpage, Mount of Olives, the Temple Mount, superimpose it with the map on the other side, and you will see that everything from the Mount of Bethany, Mount of Olives, going through the Golden Gate here, Temple Mount, would have been, there's not that stuff built up, so Jesus would have been able to see the whole city from the Temple Mount. He would have seen the Antonia Fortress over here, the Via Dolorosa, the Arch of Ecce Homo, all the way past the Church of the Holy Sepulchre to Golgotha. In other words, when it says Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem, it's almost a straight line. He didn't deviate. He went straight to what he was supposed to do. And that's the way for Palm Sunday, coming from the colt from Bethpage and Bethany, down the Mount of Olives, through the Golden Gate, onto the Temple Mount. And on the Temple Mount, that's where the Pharisees tell them, rebuke your disciples. This is a holy spot, you're blasphemy. No, even these stones would cry out if I would tell my disciples to stop. And then obviously the rest of Holy Week, the arrest, he would be back here in the Mount of Olives in Gethsemane, arrested, brought through probably the Golden Gate again, this time arrested, tied hand, before Pilate, Via Dolorosa, Good Friday, and Easter. So that, in a very quick way, is a tour of the Holy Land and Palm Sunday and what Jesus did during this week. Any questions about anything?